Welcome to the Inner Child Revolution, the podcast where inner child healing, quantum physics, and spiritual awakening guide coaches, change makers, and entrepreneurs to reclaim their power and create the life they were always meant to live. And I'm your host, Niko Ana Jeanne. I want to open today with a dare. I dare you to prosper. And I mean that seriously, because I've come to understand that prospering truly, unapologetically claiming abundance in your life is one of the most courageous and revolutionary things a human being can do right now in this world and in this paradigm with all the conditioning we've been handed. And it takes guts. And today we're going to talk about why. I want to share something with you before we go any further. I grew up with a lot of stories around money, lack, limitation, confusion, and mixed signals that left me genuinely not knowing what to believe about what I was allowed to want or have. And for a long time, longer than I'd like to admit, those stories ran my life without me even fully seeing them. Now, I've done a lot of work, in fact, years of it. And honestly, it's only been recently, even in the last few months, that something has genuinely shifted in me around this, where I've been able to really land into what I know to be true about prosperity at a level that goes way beyond money and beyond strategy and beyond anything external. And what I now know is that the paradigm most of us were handed about abundance was never the truth. It was just what got passed down. And we get to choose something different. So let's say it plainly. Most of us have received profoundly confusing messages about wealth and abundance our entire lives. And I'm not just talking about what we heard at home growing up, although that is a big piece of it, and we'll get there. But I'm talking about the culture, the media, the stories we've been fed for decades about what money means and who gets to have it. I mean, think about almost every movie or TV show you've ever watched. The wealthy character, how do they usually get written? Corrupt, cold, manipulative, and willing to destroy anyone who gets in their way. And the struggling character, they're warm, they're real, they're the one you love and the one you root for. So from the time we were children sitting in front of screens absorbing stories, we were being handed a very specific equation. Wealth equals moral failure and struggle equals virtue. And then in the very same society, we're told to hustle, to want more, to aspire, to build wealth, to succeed. Do you see the contradiction? We've been handed down two completely opposite messages simultaneously and then left to wonder why we feel so confused and conflicted about money. Like why we want it and feel guilty for wanting it. And at the same time, we work hard to create it and then somehow find ways to push it away. This is not a personal failing. This is collective conditioning. It's race mind, and it runs deep. Back in 1903, over 100 years ago, a man named Henry Harrison Brown wrote a book called Dollars Want Me. Okay, just sit with that title for a second. Not I want dollars, or whatever currency you currently use. Not how to attract money, not the secret to financial success. Dollars want me. That is a completely different orientation to abundance. And Brown understood something that most people are still trying to grasp today. When you are in a state of wanting, chasing, grasping, trying to get it, you're operating from lack, and you are the one in pursuit. And what you pursue tends to stay just ahead of you. But when you flip that, when you understand yourself as someone that prosperity is naturally drawn to, the entire dynamic changes. You stop chasing and you start receiving. You stop running after abundance and you start becoming someone abundance runs towards. Brown called poverty a mental condition, not a circumstance. It's a condition of the mind. And he believed and taught that it can be changed by shifting the fundamental stance you hold towards money. Not by wanting more, by understanding that supply is infinite and it is already moving toward you. That idea was revolutionary in 1903. Honestly, it's still revolutionary now because most people are still chasing. Catherine Ponder wrote a book that has really stayed with me called Dare to Prosper. And that word dare is everything because she understood that choosing prosperity and really claiming it requires you to go against a tremendous amount of internal and external resistance. Ponder taught that prosperity operates according to law. The same way you don't have to convince gravity to work, you don't have to convince abundance to exist. It already does. The question is whether you are in alignment with it or you are in resistance to it. Florence Scovel Shinn was pointing to the same truth from her own unique angle, and she wrote about divine inheritance, the idea that abundance is not something you earn after proving yourself worthy enough. It's already yours by the nature of what you are, a spiritual being in a universe that is fundamentally abundant. And Shin had a very specific understanding of how we block that inheritance without even realizing it. She believed our words aren't just expressions of what we think, they actively are shaping our reality. Every time you speak lack out loud, every time you affirm struggle as your story, you're participating in its creation. She literally titled one of her books, Your Word is Your Want, and she meant that seriously. So between Ponder's dare and Shin's understanding of the spoken word, prosperity is your birthright, and every word you speak is either claiming it or arguing against it. Now, I want to bring in the piece that is at the heart of everything we do on this podcast, because here's what I've noticed. When people struggle with prosperity, and I mean prosperity in its fullest sense, not just money, but vitality, joy, creative flow, deep relationships, a sense of purpose, it almost always traces back to something that was formed very early. And the inner child who grew up in an environment of lack doesn't just carry beliefs about money. They carry a fundamental story about what the world is like, whether it is safe to receive, whether they're worthy of good things, whether abundance is even real, or whether it's something other people get. And that child is still listening when you set an income goal, still flinching when something really good is about to land in your life, bracing for the catch, because in their experience, there was always a catch. I spent years not fully understanding why I couldn't just receive, why good things would come close and then something would happen, or why I could intellectually embrace the truth about abundance while some younger part of me was quietly, persistently unconvinced. That child needed something that affirmations couldn't give her. She needed to be witnessed. She needed the adult version of me to actually address what she experienced, not skip past it to get the positive thinking faster. Here's something I want you to consider. You were not born with a poverty mindset. Nobody is. I mean, watch a young child in the grocery store sometime. Before any programming has landed and before any stories about money or worthiness or what's realistic, a young child just reaches for things freely, naturally, without a single thought about whether they deserve it or whether it's too much to ask. They want something, they reach for it. Simple as that. That is prosperity consciousness in its purest form. And it's not greed, it's not entitlement, it's just life moving naturally towards more life. And then somewhere along the way, through 1,000 small moments, through the culture we absorbed and the world we grew up in, that natural reaching started to feel dangerous or embarrassing, or like something that needed to be managed or hidden or apologized for. But the desire didn't go away, it just went underground. Here's what I find really fascinating. Look at animals. I mean, think about feral cats, creatures that have survived entirely on instinct with no guarantees and nothing handed to them. And yet, a feral cat will always seek out warmth, food, and shelter. And they move towards abundance without a single moment of wondering whether they deserve it. If you have ever taken in a feral animal, you know this. The moment they feel safe, they receive fully without guilt, without questioning whether it's too much, without feeling like they have to earn their place first. This is the natural state. And that is what we looked like before the stories arrived. And here's what I really want you to hear. That part of you, the part that once reached freely, that hadn't yet learned to doubt its own desires, that part is still in there. It didn't disappear, it just got quiet. And part of this work is giving it permission to be loud again. Okay, let's get practical for a minute, because understanding where these beliefs came from is one thing. But how do we actually move out of them? Well, the first step is awareness, and awareness starts with desire. You have to actually let yourself want something, not in a vague, wouldn't it be kind of nice way, but really want it. Let the desire be real. And then pay attention to what happens next. Because if there is a conflicting belief running in your subconscious that says you can't have it, or you'll feel it. And it might show up as stress or anxiety or kind of a low grade frustration that doesn't quite make sense, or a tightening somewhere in your body. That feeling is information. It's not a sign that you want too much or that the desire is wrong. It's a signal that somewhere underneath the surface, there's a belief running that contradicts what you want. And you can't work with something you can't see. So the wanting and then the willingness to feel what comes up around the wanting is where the work begins. You have to be willing to go there. And then, and this is where people sometimes really think I'm being extreme, but hear me out. You have to get really intentional about what you're feeding your consciousness every single day. Because here's the thing, if you want to experience a level of prosperity you have never experienced before, you're going to need a level of prosperity consciousness you've never had before. And you can't build that while you are constantly reinforcing the old story. That means becoming aware of how you talk about money, because your subconscious mind can't tell the difference between a joke and a declaration. So when you laugh about being broke, or you commiserate about financial struggle, or when you casually affirm lack in your everyday speech, your nervous system is receiving all of that as instruction. It doesn't know you were kidding. It just knows what you keep saying. And it goes beyond words. It includes what you watch and consume. The stories your nervous system is absorbing on a daily basis matter more than most people realize. If you're constantly consuming content where struggle is glorified and wealth is the villain, that narrative is landing somewhere. And it's reinforcing a story about what the world is like and what kind of person gets to prosper in it. So stay intentional. Get intentional, stay intentional, and start actively seeking out stories and narratives where things work out, where the main character moves through difficulty and comes out the other side into something good. Because it doesn't have to be unrealistic. Life does have plot twists. That's fine. But what you want your brain and your nervous system receiving on a regular basis is a narrative that supports the idea that prosperity is possible, that good things happen, and that life works out. And yes, sometimes that means watching something that feels lighter than what you're used to. Something that your more sophisticated adult self might dismiss as too simple or too positive. But remember, we're talking to the inner child here too, and that child responds to the story and always has. So feed them a better one. And while we're talking about what to consume, I want to suggest something specific. These authors we talked about today, Catherine Ponder, Florence Scovel Shinn, and Henry Harrison Brown, they're not just names to drop. They're books that are genuinely transformative, and they're a beautiful replacement for content that reinforces lack. So maybe instead of scrolling or instead of watching something that leaves you feeling kind of small or hopeless or stressed, pick up Catherine Ponder's Dare to Prosper. Pick up Florence Scovel Shinn's The Game of Life and How to Play It. And pick up Henry Harrison Brown's Dollars Want Me. And let those voices be the ones filling your consciousness. And there's just so many more out there, but those are the three I just decided to talk about today. Because what you repeatedly expose yourself to becomes the story you live inside of. So let's come back to that dare. Dare to prosper. Dare to prosper. I dare you. Because when you really look at what prosperity requires of most of us, it is not just a mindset shift. It's an act of courage, a genuine, deliberate decision to break rules that were never written down, but were absolutely enforced. And this is something we go deep into in the Inner Child Revolution, something called the toxic family rules, which are unspoken laws of the household you grew up in, and the things that were never said out loud but were absolutely understood. like don't want too much, don't outshine anyone, don't talk about money. People like us don't live like that. Who do you think you are? Now, nobody sat you down and read you this list of rules, but you absorbed them, and the inner child always absorbs them and is living by them. And those unspoken rules become your invisible walls of your reality and the edges of what felt safe to want, to reach for, and to become. And here's what makes prospering such a radical act. Every time you allow yourself to receive more abundance, more joy, more freedom, more success, you are rewriting one of those rules. And you're standing in the place where the old story said stop, and you're choosing to keep going anyway. And you're looking at everything the family system, the culture, the conditioning told you about your limits, and you're saying, that was their reality, not mine. And that takes courage, real courage, because the nervous system doesn't immediately know the difference between growth and danger. So expansion can feel threatening when you've spent a lifetime learning to stay small. The inner child can get scared when things start to go well because, well, it never felt safe before. It doesn't make sense to the adult, but it makes sense to the child. So this is the work, not just understanding prosperity as a concept, but daring to live it and daring to break the unspoken rules that have been quietly running your life. Daring to write new ones, rules that say abundance is safe, that receiving is allowed, and that you're not betraying anyone by thriving. That's the revolution, and it starts with a dare. So if today's conversation is stirring something in you, and if you can feel the gap between what you know intellectually about abundance and what the younger parts of you actually believe, I want to invite you to go deeper. When I talk about toxic cycles around prosperity, I'm not just talking about people who grew up in obvious financial hardship. These unspoken rules live in all kinds of family systems. Families where maybe there was plenty of money, but prosperity still felt dangerous or conditional. Or homes where success was discouraged, maybe. Environments where the rules around what you were allowed to want were never spoken but deeply felt. So you don't have to have grown up poor to be living in a poverty consciousness. So if prosperity has ever felt like something that's always out of reach, no matter how much you grow, no matter how hard you work, the toxic family rules may be exactly where to look. So in my free masterclass, the 4-step method to break toxic cycles and become the coach you're meant to be, I walk you through how your inner child might be quietly running your business or trying to, and in some cases, how that younger part of you may be the very thing stopping you from pursuing it at all. And we look at where these patterns come from and how inner child reparenting helps you shift them so you can finally lead and receive from a grounded, whole place. The link is in the show notes. And my book, Healing the Inner Child with EFT Tapping, is a powerful place to begin if you want a hands-on guide to building a real relationship with the younger parts of yourself. So prosperity stops feeling like a dare and starts feeling like home. Henry Harrison Brown said, "Dollars want you." Catherine Ponder said, "Dare to prosper." Florence Scovel Shinn said, "It's your divine inheritance." They were all pointing to the same truth. Stop waiting. Stop shrinking. Stop living inside rules that were never yours to begin with. You were born reaching for life. It's time to reach again. This is the Inner Child Revolution, and I'll see you next time.